Welcome, everybody. So glad to see each of you here today, and want to welcome everybody here in Oklahoma City and say thank you for being here today, and to everybody watching in Clovis, New Mexico. So glad that each of you are here. Would you join me at all of our places around the country? Would you join me in a round of applause? Welcome your brothers and sisters in the Lord this morning, and so glad that each of them are with us today. We're glad that you're here. Today we are launching into the second sermon in a series called Made. We're talking about the greatness of our God and how He has created great things, awesome things, and we really stand in awe of all that He has done and all that He is. Everything that you see in our world today has a maker. Everything that you see has a maker. The seat that you're sitting on has a maker. The clothes that you wore today, they didn't just happen. They had a maker. The car that you drove here today with all of its complex systems and tremendous thing, it had a maker. All of these things did. In fact, I just want to kind of give you a little window into that. The thing that we know about makers is that when you look at something that's made, it tells us something about its maker. You know what I'm saying? In fact, ladies, let me give you an example. Ladies, why don't you tell me this? Some of you ladies may know this one. Who is the maker of this right here? Who's the designer? Who is that? Okay, who is it? It's Vera Bradley. My wife knows. Sister Fi knows it. It's Vera Bradley. If you don't know, that's who it is. I blocked out the name there so you couldn't tell, just so you wouldn't nobody would be cheating. But it's Vera Bradley. You don't even know all those different patterns and all those different things. There's a similarity between all of it because there's a common designer. One person came up with all these ideas, and I don't know, her purses and handbags are real popular for a while, I understand. Now, those of you who are men, like, I don't care. I never really noticed. What about this? Let me ask you, who's the designer of that? Anybody know? Anybody know? That's an antique Porsche. If I used a modern one, you'd probably know it right off, right? That's an antique Porsche, and Ferdinand Porsche designed that, or Porsche, or however you say that. I don't know how that all works, but Ferdinand Porsche made this thing. He designed it. Now, let me ask you, what's the common thing between that car and this one? Actually, there are some similarities. They both kind of have that rounded body shape. They both have air-cooled, rear-mounted engines with a trunk in the front. You know what it is? What is it? They're both German. They actually have the same designer. It is. It's the same designer. The same guy designed these. And so when you see similarities between something, you say, oh, look, here's an interesting parallels between this car and this car. Even though they're vastly different, there's some parallels here. They had a common designer. They're the same designer. Now, let me just say this. Next time you hear somebody say on the Discovery Channel, or read a book, or you read a science textbook and you read something like, we share most of our DNA with monkeys. True or false? We had a common evolutionary ancestor. False. The truth is, next time you hear something like that, think, oh, common designer. Right? Common designer. Look at how God wove this world together so that so many things rest on the common things that we hold in common with all of these other things that have been created. Last week, we talked about the greatness of our God. We went out to the edge of the universe. We talked about stars and galaxies. The DVD of last week is available. A couple of people asked me if they could get it, and so we did make a DVD. It's available. If you want to just be blown away, study the stars and look out to the edge of the known universe and see the hundreds of billions of galaxies containing stars many, many times bigger than our sun. 1 million Earths could fit inside the sun, but it's a very, very small star compared to the giants that are out there. Before this series is over, we'll look at that one more time. But last week we talked about how big and how great and how awesome our God is. This week, we're going to go the opposite direction. Okay, we're going to start small and we're going to get smaller. We're going to get really, really tiny. Before this day is over, we're going to go so small you can't see most of the stuff we're going to talk about today. All right? We're going really, really small. Now, I'm going to start, there's so many different places I could go. We could talk about lions and giraffes and all the amazing creatures that God has made. But I'm going to start like any good man with bugs. Okay? Not that kind of bug, but this kind of bug. All right, Genesis chapter 1 and verse 24 and 25 says this, "And God said, 'Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind.' And it was so. And God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good." So God says all these things are good, even these little things that creep along the ground. Just in case you're creeped out about that a little bit today, that's just in case you are, I want to just encourage you that God says it's good. Okay, so today I'm going to start by talking about this right here. I want to talk to you about the bombardier beetle. All right, this is a little bit different. In fact, inside this little beetle, there are two holding tanks. That's a little bit different. Every different kind of species has its defenses against predators. You know, when you're my size, your defense against predators is run. Okay, that's some of you bigger guys come fast. I can run faster than you can, I bet, at least for a little ways. And so that's kind of my strategy. But every different species has its own little strategy for dealing with predators. Now, some of them camouflage. I wish I could stop and talk about camouflage. There's some amazing things that God has made. This one here has two holding tanks inside its abdomen containing highly volatile, explosive chemicals. It's a very amazing little thing. In fact, what happens is when it's got on the tail end of that, it's got two little explosive tubes, kind of two little Gatling guns, a double barrel thing on the back of it, on the back of this little beetle. And when these two chemicals mix together, there's a violent reaction and it explodes. The problem is, that if it exploded inside the beetle, you would just have beetle juice. That's all you would have. Okay, because it just mix them together and kaboom, there would be no more beetle. And that's kind of, it would avoid the predator, but it would kind of kill the point at the same time. And so there's a third little tank that shoots in a chemical called an inhibitor. It stops the reaction from happening inside the beetle. And so this mixture travels down the tube and gets to the very end of the beetle. And right there at the end, there's a little fourth chemical that gets injected to the mix called an inhibitor blocker, or it's something that stops the inhibitor from working. And so all of a sudden, kaboom, exploding out the back of this little beetle is this amazing thing. And so what you get is this little beetle that walks around looking all innocent and nice, but actually when it comes out the back of it, it's shooting out at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. You know how hot that is, right? That's hot enough to boil water. That's very small, and so it doesn't pose a big risk to you, but you get this. See the ant? It's shooting it out. The ant was going to attack it, and so here's this fire and smoke, kapow. Wow. Now let me just imagine something with you. Can you imagine that system right there developing over let's say hundreds of thousands of years? So the beetles get together and man, we're getting killed by these predators. We need something to do. Let's make some explosive chemicals. And so they have a couple of holding tanks of explosive chemicals, and they have all kinds of beetle kids, and the beetle kids grow up, and they go out, and here comes a predator. Boom! And the beetles get back together, the few that survive, get back together and say, we need an inhibitor. We need something to keep this thing from blowing our kids up. And so they develop an inhibitor. And so they have all kinds of beetle children. And the beetle children go out there, and here comes the predator. And the predator comes along, and they mix everything together. And there's no explosion inside the beetle, but there's no reaction either, because there's no inhibitor blocker. And so all those kids get eaten. And the few that survive get back together and say, what we need is an inhibitor blocker. Okay, the bombardier beetle would not exist. It would have been eaten. All of them would have been eaten. It would have never survived to develop this kind of detailed, intricate, amazing system. What does it say? It says it has a designer. That's what it says. It says it didn't happen. It was made. It was created. Something so small as this. Yet God does that. That's awesome. I love it. Both of those take faith. To believe that all that just happened, it takes faith. Absolutely. It takes faith and chance and time. Chance plus time equals that. It takes faith and chance and time. I just say, why not put faith in a person who made it? They both take faith. If you're an evolutionist, you believe in something, you have faith. You have faith for things that you never saw. You didn't see all this happen. We don't even have any evidence of most of it. No fossil record to support most of the changes that people say happen. I say, why not put your faith in someone who made it, who created it? Let me show you another one, right? Another really cool thing. I just found out about this one this week. That's a 1 millimeter. That's actually a couple of millimeters long. They're a little bug, an Issus beetle or jumping bug of some kind. It has really powerful hind legs, and it jumps. The problem is its brain is too small to coordinate its legs so that they jump together. And so it gets around this by something. This blew me away. You ready? Look at that. You see it down there on the back of the leg mechanisms, or the jumping legs. You see it down at the bottom. For those of you who are mechanics, what is that? Let me zoom it in for you. It's a gear. It's not a pike rust. No, that's under. That's under a highly powerful microscope. And they found, and just came out like this week. There was a news story that came out. The first set of gears ever found in nature. Oh, you thought people invented gears. You thought people said, if we made kind of a round shape and put some teeth on it, these things would stick right together. No, God did that. We just came about it years and years and years and years and years later. And then we found out that God did it first. Wow. God made these things. When we arrive at these conclusions, we say, how in the world did these things come about by chance? They didn't. In fact, Romans chapter 1 says this: the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them. There are some things that you can know about God. How? Because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Translation, you look at the world and you're like, this didn't just happen. Somebody made this. You look up at the stars and you see the galaxies and you say, there's that many galaxies and we're just one little speck in one galaxy, and there's so many galaxies. If we divided them up, every man, woman, and child on the earth could own several, and there'd be lots left over. And every one of them contains billions and billions of stars. This is made. Somebody did this. There must be something way bigger than me out there. Something with eternal power, something with divine nature, with way more wisdom than I've got to make all of this. And so men are without excuse. So the next time you see one of these uber smart guys with an IQ of 2 zillion, who comes on the internet or speaks in a science textbook or sits down and says, all of this just came about by eons and eons of time and chance, and just understand this: that when men choose that they will not believe in a God, they will believe in anything. If they choose, I will not believe in God, then you'll fill the gap with something. They just happen to fill the gap with time plus chance. What do you believe in? What do you believe in? What's the foundation, the bedrock of your life? Look at the rest of these verses. For although they knew God, verse 21, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Wow. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Let me plead with you about something. Don't shut God out. Don't willfully, when you know God, you know who He is and you know what He wants, don't say no. Don't say, no, I don't want to believe that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to trust Him. Don't do that. Because when you do, the darkness that you descend into is a darkness you have made, and it's deep and dark. Because when you shut out the light, all that's left is darkness. Their foolish hearts were darkened. They claimed to be wise. They became fools. Now look at this. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Now, I don't think probably any of you have a little shrine set up in the corner of your living room with a little snake or a little animal or a little weird goddess with 16 arms or something. You know, I don't think probably any of you do. But you know what? Every one of us is hardwired to worship. And you'll worship something. You'll worship something. I promise you will. If you don't put God in His place, you will exchange something for Him. I promise you will. It might be the boy band One Direction for a bunch of tween girls. And we laugh at them. Oh, I'll tell you what, this Justin Bieber and One Direction thing, I don't know why they're so fascinated. You know what? It might be sports figures for you. It might be fishing or a car or a job or political power. It might be the almighty dollar or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband or a wife or kids or family. It could be a lot of different things, but you will exchange the Creator for something created if you don't trust in Him. You gotta believe in a great God. Now, I just encourage you, humble yourself before God. When you come to the Word of God, when you come to Jesus, humble yourself and say, I'm not that good, I'm not that smart, I need you. Show me, enlighten me, open my eyes, open the eyes of my heart, let me see who you really, really are. Now, that's not the only cool thing that God created. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to go a little further. I want to talk to you about microscopic life. Okay, microscopic life. In Genesis 1:20, God said, let the water teem with living creatures and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. And so He created everything on the fifth day and blessed it and said, be fruitful and multiply. And boy, did they be fruitful and multiply. I want to show you something, okay? Check this out. This is living creatures. Little tiny, that's called a water flea. Little tiny creatures. Ones that you'll never see with your eyes. You'll never be able to. But in every lake and in every river, dip up a cup full and pour it out on a microscope slide and zoom in, and you will be blown away by things like seed shrimp. Blown away by things that I don't even know what that's called. It's weird. It's amazing. But you know what? God made all of these things so tiny, so small, so insignificant, and yet they had a designer. They had a designer. Every single one of these things. Intricate, amazing, fantastic life underneath a microscope. Things that you would have never thought of. In fact, the smallest of these creatures, one that we'll see right at the end. It is 10 nanometers in width. Now, you don't say, I don't know what a nanometer is. I don't remember my high school measuring systems. Well, okay, to put that in perspective, if you take a human hair, If you take a human hair and you hold it up, a human hair is anywhere from 20 nanometers to 180 nanometers, depending on baby hair and the coarseness of your hair. Anywhere from 20 to 180 with an average size of 70 to 100 nanometers. The smallest of those creatures you just saw was 10 nanometers. Half or less than half, 1/10 the size, really, of an average human hair. Wow. Tiny, tiny things. You'll never see them. But God imagined them and they came to be. Just like that. But you know what? Those things are really huge compared to the rest of the things I want to talk to you about today. I want to show you something. Check this one out. In a second, check this one out. There we go. These are microbes in your mouth. Everybody's like, did I brush this morning? I don't know. Oh yeah, you brushed this morning, but they're still there. All right, there's still a bunch of them, and it's okay because honestly, a lot of them are your friends. Okay, there are a few of them that are your enemies, but there are a lot of them that are your friends. It's quite all right. Okay, this shot. Let me give you some fun facts about microbes since we're here, and just to bless all of you and make you so the rest of your day you're like this. Okay, just to share this with you. Less than 0.5% of all the 2 to 3 billion microbe species in the world have been identified. Microbes comprise 60% of the biomass on the earth. Okay? Bacteria are 60% of the weight of living things on the earth. That's approximate. That's estimated. Microbes, did you know that microbes are your friends? They generate over half of the oxygen you breathe. Algae, things like that, bacteria that process carbon dioxide and process nitrogen. They produce half of the oxygen, over half of the oxygen that you breathe. 500 species of bacteria live inside your mouth. Billions of bacteria live in your intestines. Okay, it's all right. It's all right. Just relax. Everybody's like, I'm taking medicine as soon as I go home and I'm going straight to bed. It's okay. You've lived all your life with it. You just didn't know. Maybe you did. Maybe you don't want to think about it. What about this? There are some amazing, very cool things that God did with bacteria. This one here can withstand radiation 1,000 times as much as would kill a human being. Can withstand radiation. Incredible things. But you know what? A lot of these things are actually huge compared to what I'm about to show you next. Okay? Bacteria are quite large compared to another smaller thing. In fact, they're the smallest of sort of living things. They're viruses. In fact, a lot of scientists, they say that viruses are not actually alive. They're not actually living at all because they can't reproduce themselves because they only have partial DNA or RNA. They have to attach themselves to something else. In fact, here's a picture. There's a virus. They only have partial DNA. They can move around, but they can't replicate themselves without attaching to a host. So they'll attach to a cell, inject their DNA into that cell. The DNA will replicate and replicate and replicate and replicate using the DNA of the cell of its host. And then that cell will die, burst open, and millions more viruses will spill into your bloodstream. And you know what? It's happening this very moment, right now, while you're sitting there. Maybe before before this series is over, I'll tell you about and explain why you're not dead yet. Because God has created this amazing defense system in your body. Incredible. But these viruses, they're so tiny. In fact, let me show you. There's a bunch of them on a bacteria. Whoa. This one here is particularly nasty. That's the 1918 flu virus. This one killed 30 to 50 million people worldwide. World War I killed 10 million. This one killed 30 to 50 million people. Back in the days before health care was better and all that, it's the 1918 flu pandemic that happened. Amazing stuff that God created. They can make you incredibly ill and then be defeated, like the virus, or like the virus that causes chickenpox. It can just go dormant and live in your body for the next few decades and then come back as shingles. Isn't that lovely? But you know what? There are so many of these. If you went out to the ocean right now and you dipped up a teaspoon of ocean water, and you dipped it up, and here it is. This is a teaspoon of ocean water, and you could zoom in on it small enough to see the viruses. On average, they say there are 5 million virus particles per teaspoon of seawater. Now, if you've ever been out like I have out to the ocean and been knocked down by a wave and swallowed a bunch of seawater, now you're like, oh no. Because I'm pretty sure I swallowed several teaspoons. You know what? Based on that, considering how many teaspoons approximately would be in the ocean, if you took all the viruses in the world and you lined them up end to end using 0.125 nanometers per virus as an average measurement, they would stretch 1 billion light years into space if you laid them end to end. But you know what? We're going to go smaller. We're going to go way down. We're going to go down to the level of the basic building blocks of matter. Let's talk about atoms. When you're starting to measure things like atoms, you can't use feet or inches anymore. We've already been talking about nanometers a little bit, so I want to try to help you visualize this just a little bit, all right? If you would, this right here is 39 inches. That's a meter. Approximately 39 of our inches is 1 meter. If you were to take that right there, and you were to sit down with a really, really good pair of scissors, and you were to start clipping off little bitty slices of this, and let's say you split it up into, let's say you cut it up 1 billion times. 1 billion times, right? That would be 1 nanometer. Each one of those would be a nanometer. If you cut it up 1 billion times, they'd be a nanometer. Now, if you took one of those clippings, and you took a really, really good pair of scissors, and you sat down and you cut that one into 1 million pieces, that would be a femtometer. And that's what we have to use when we're talking about the size of atoms. Because when you're talking small, it just doesn't work to talk just about meters any longer, or inches, or half inches, or 1/16. You have to talk really, really small. You say, Daryl, that just isn't working for me. I can't visualize that small. Well, how small is an atom really, Daryl? Give me an example. All right, let me see if I can do that. All right, let me say, what if you use this illustration from John Norton from Pitt State University? Suppose I said that I'm going to give you an atom of gold, pure gold, an atom of it for every second that has elapsed since some dramatic event in history. Let's say, give me an event in history in the past. Creation. Okay. I was going to say the Revolutionary War, but I'm feeling generous. Let's say we're going to go further back than, we're going to go past when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. We're going to go all the way back past the time of Christ 2,000 years ago. We're going to go all the way back. In fact, for the sake of this illustration, I don't subscribe to the Big Bang Theory, but for the sake of this illustration, let's imagine that the Big Bang Theory were true. All right? Let's just imagine. Scientists say, there weren't any of them there, by the way, but they say that would have been about 13.8 billion years ago. 13.8 billion years ago. And let's imagine that I'm going to give you 1 atom of gold for every second of 13.8 billion years. If you do the math, take 13.8 billion, multiply it by 365.25 to get the length, to get the number of days involved in that, multiply it by 24 to get the number of hours, multiply it by 60 to get the number of minutes, multiply it by 60 again to get the number of seconds, and you come up with 435 quadrillion seconds. Trust me, I did it yesterday. 435 quadrillion seconds. Whoa, you got a bunch of gold coming your way, right? How much you think that is? I mean, tablespoon, bucket load, truckload. What do you got? This is a 1 ounce gold coin. Gold's very expensive, right? Very, very expensive per ounce. I don't know what it is right now, but it's up there. Very, very expensive. Maybe you got 435 quadrillion atoms. Maybe you've got a 1 ounce gold coin. Maybe. How about 1.5% of an ounce of gold? Now, I've got to be honest with you. That was the smallest I could do to where you could tell what it was. That piece is too big. 3,000 times too big. 435 quadrillion atoms, and you couldn't see it yet. That's how small an atom is. But guess what? We're going to go smaller. Just when you thought we couldn't get any smaller, right? We're going to go even smaller. I want us to zoom down. You want to see an atom? You want to see the individual atoms? Actually see them? You actually can't. Visible light its wavelength is too long for you to see an atom. Scientifically, it's impossible for you to see with a microscope. However, with an electron microscope, they did this right here to a very, very thin sheet of gold. And you see the little individual dots? That's as close as you're going to get to seeing an atom. It's the most powerfully magnified image of an atom that we can produce with the microscopes and the technology that we have. And you say, Daryl, I don't see how we can go any smaller than that. Well, let's talk about it. Let's try, okay? Because first they thought, years and years ago, they thought, atoms, man, that's got to be, because the word atom in Greek means uncuttable. It's like the one thing, you get it down as small, so small, it's impossible to break it into anything smaller. That's what atom means in Greek. But then they discovered, oh yeah, protons, neutrons, they clump together to form a little nucleus in the middle of the atom, and then the electrons, well, you've seen the diagrams in school, right? The electrons whirl around the outside, and wow, yeah, it's amazing. But did you know that every drawing you've ever seen of an atom is completely scientifically impossible? It's not accurate, not even close. Because atoms are mostly empty space. They're mostly empty space. And if you were to, in fact, let me see if I can illustrate this. If you were to draw an atom, it wouldn't look like anything. Because, like a scientifically accurate model of one. Because if you took the nucleus of, let's say, an iron atom, all right? What if you blew up an atom until the nucleus was the size of a tennis ball? Okay, if it was the diagrams like you see in your little book, you'd have electrons about right here, right? Whirling around the size of a nucleus the size of a tennis ball. If you blew up an iron atom until it was the size of the nucleus, the protons and neutrons in the middle were the size of a tennis ball, the electrons in the iron atom would be rotating 1.2 miles that way. Or that way, or that way. The size of a tennis ball, and your electrons are 1.2 miles away. If you were to do that with a hydrogen atom, the simplest of all the atoms, one electron swirling around the outside of a hydrogen atom. If you were to take the nucleus of that atom, of a hydrogen, and blow it up until it was the size of a tennis ball, the electron, the one lonely electron around the hydrogen atom, would be 4 miles that way. The nucleus is this big and 4 miles out, swirling around. So here's the question. If that is what an atom is, if that's what an atom is, and that's how big it is, it's got all this, the mass is so tiny and the space is so big. And you're made up of atoms, mostly of carbon and water. If that's what it is, what's holding you up right now? No, really, think about it. Like if we made a scale model of an atom and we tried to crash two of them together, what are the odds they'd actually hit each other? They'd just pass right through, wouldn't they? I mean, a tennis ball and an electron 4 miles away, what are the odds they're going to touch and hold each other at bay, like that picture right there? Why don't you right now on that seat, why don't you just suddenly sink through it and fall down and land right on the floor and embarrass yourself right in front of all of them? Why doesn't that happen? Let me tell you why. You ready? Here's why. That's why. You say, what do you mean, Daryl? The reason why you don't crash to the ground, and the reason why the positive charges in the nucleus of the atom, you remember positive charges repel each other? You remember that from high school physics? Remember magnets, they're the same, push each other apart, and positive charges repel positive charges? Why don't the protons positively charge and the neutrons with no charge at all, why don't they blow up and explode, and all of matter just explode in a white-hot explosion of energy and heat? Why isn't that the case? Here's why. Hebrews chapter 1. God says this, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, and through whom He made the universe. I tell you again, that man made it all. Every bit of it. All the stuff, not only the billions upon billions of galaxies in the known universe, but the tiniest of things that you will not and can never see with visible light, because it is scientifically impossible to do so. That man made it all. And then look at this verse. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by the word of His power. King James Version says, upholding all things by the word of His power. The reason that you don't fly off into space somewhere, the reason why matter itself doesn't dissolve and explode into a shapeless, formless mass of nothingness, is this man right here, who by His powerful word holds your body together, who by His statement, by His word, because of His decision, nothing flies apart, but it all holds together. You think that chair is what's holding you up right now? Oh no. No. Now here's what's amazingly incredible. That man said this: are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of my Father. Now Jesus goes and reaches out for the most worthless thing that He could think of. Now He would have known many other more insignificant things, but the people in those days didn't know microscopes. Never seen all the things that we talked about today. They didn't have any idea of most of that. So Jesus says, let me talk to you about a sparrow. Anybody today seen a sparrow and you stopped, you're like, oh, a sparrow. Look, Johnny, Susie, it's a sparrow. No. You might have said, if people wouldn't drop their trash on Walmart parking lot, there wouldn't be all these sparrows. You might have said that. But nobody was amazed at the sparrow. And so Jesus reaches out and said, hey, look, 2 sparrows. Sell those for a penny, right? And yet not one of these little things that God created has ever fallen to the ground apart from the will of your Father. You ever feel like in your life, you ever feel like you're just insignificant, tired? Like, my problem, I've got this problem, but I believe that God's big enough to solve it. I believe that He is. But I just don't know. It's so small and so stupid. He's got all these galaxies to think about. He's got all this stuff to think about. Surely He doesn't care about my problem. Surely He doesn't care about what's going on in my life right now. What I would ask you is this: do you think a God who could say to a sparrow, never falls to the ground, but what I saw it, and I allowed it to happen? You think a God who can create something so detailed as a little beetle that can defend itself against its predators? You think a God that could shape and come up with the idea of an atom and somehow frame you and the earth and everything and hang it on nothing, on nothingness that's a little atom with an electron equivalent of 4 miles away, and somehow make everything hold together? Do you think really that a God who can see all of that and thought of it, do you think that your problem is too little? Or that you're too little or you're too insignificant? Do you think, my friends, that He didn't notice your job? Do you think that maybe He didn't see your sickness? Do you think that maybe He doesn't feel for you when your family breaks your heart? Do you think that maybe He didn't notice when your grandson is in pain and you feel like you can't keep going? Do you think He didn't notice when there's a little baby keeping you awake late at night and you're tired and you got to go to work? You think maybe this God who created the sparrows and thought of the atom and set it all in motion, you think that maybe He didn't notice when you lose your job? You think maybe He doesn't care when you're getting ready to make a major shift in your life and you don't know which way to turn? You think He doesn't care? You think He doesn't notice? You think He doesn't see? Oh, my friend, look at the rest of these verses. The very hairs of your head are numbered. Some of you are not taking up too much of God's time. He's very grateful for that. The very hairs of your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. Look at this verse. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. You're not just a collection of atoms that crawled out of primordial ooze 5 billion years ago. You are not just a speck of meaningless dust on a small planet circling around an average star in an unknown galaxy in the dead zone between two of the spiral arms. You are not just that. You are a special creation of an awesome, infinite, loving God who made you, shaped you, formed you, has a plan for every single second of your life. And the scripture says, in His book, all the days of my life were written before one of them had even come to pass. Wow. Don't you ever look in the mirror again and think you're insignificant. Don't you ever look in the mirror and think, I don't matter. Don't you ever look in the mirror and think God doesn't care. Don't you ever start to open your mouth to pray and then shut it thinking He doesn't care. He's not listening. Don't you ever do that. Do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Your God, my God, is great. And up there and with us and in us is this God who by the word of His power holds it all together. Your God is a great and big God, yes, but He sees every detail of your life. So what are you worried about? What are you worried about? Could it be that the things you're worried about because you're trying to run your own life? Could it be? I'm just putting this out there for you. Could it be that the reason you're afraid, the reason you're worried is because you're trying to take over this guy's job and hold your life together all by yourself, by your own strength? Could it be that you've decided that your path is better than the one who thought of the things and is holding you by the word of His power, holds your life in place? Could it be that that's why you're stressed and that's why you're worried, that's why you're afraid? Because you just haven't taken the time to realize His way is better and He loves me so much He would never, ever allow something that I didn't need into my life. We got people here today at all stages of life. We have kids here who will never remember this message. They'll grow up, and if Jesus doesn't come back first, they'll grow up and they'll never remember a word I said. But God's holding them together. And we got some kids here. Most of them are out being taught at an age-appropriate level. But you know what? God's holding them together. You worried about your kids? You ever think about them, worry about them? God is able to hold them together. He's holding their atoms together. You don't think He can hold their life together? Got kids who are, thinking about getting married. I had 2 or 3 of them talk to me just recently. I said, I'm thinking about getting married. Good. What holds that together? What's going to hold that marriage together? What's going to keep you for 50, 60 years? What's going to hold it together? You think it's you? You think somehow you're going to be tough enough, you're going to be strong enough, you're going to be wise enough? You think? No, my friend. The only thing that's going to hold your life together is a God who's way bigger than you are, but He's so big and so good, He can see the smallest speck in your life. What about those of you who are up in years and you're carrying a lot of responsibility? I know there are moms and dads here. You are carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders. I understand. 5 little lives depending on me. That can feel like a weight after a while. A couple of lives depending on you, Bobby, that can feel like a big old weight after a while. It really can. But you know what? What's going to hold you together in that process? What is it that's going to... Let me tell you, when you feel like you're going to fly apart at the seams, there is one bigger than you who's holding you together. And He can do it. Go talk to Him about it. Because you matter to Him. And we have senior citizens here who have been following the Lord for a whole lot longer than me. We have senior citizens here, and you're in, unless something amazing happens medically, you're in the later part of your life. Understand that. What's going to hold you together enough to get you to the place where God says, welcome home, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your Lord? What's going to do that? It's Jesus. It's Jesus. He upholds everything by the word of His power. And when you go to prayer, don't you forget it. Go before Him and say, God, you got to hold me together. And He will do it by His grace and by His powerful word. Would you bow your heads with me? Let's pray.